I have buried 9 men in my life and never once wept at a grave. I tell you this not to sound hard, because I am not half so hard as I pretend, but so you understand what kind of man was sitting his horse in the pines that October morning when I first saw her. I am a rancher and a widower and a coward about certain things, and I keep a small leather book in my coat where I write down the days that matter. Most days do not matter. That day I wrote only 4 words before my hand quit on me. She would not fall. If you have ever watched a person decide to keep living, not say it, not pray it, but decide it with their whole shaking body, then you already know how this story ends, and you are only here to see whether I tell it honest. I will try. I am old now, and my honesty comes cheaper than it used to, which is the one mercy of age. So stay with me. This is the story of a woman whose name I did not learn for 2 days, and how she crossed a mountain that had already taken everything from her, and how a stranger she had every reason to fear chose to ride beside her instead of away. I was that stranger. I am not the hero of it. I want that understood before we start. The snow that autumn came early and came mean, the kind that does not fall so much as it is flung. I had gone up the north cut to look for a heifer that had wandered off, cursing her and my knees and the whole foolish enterprise of cattle, when I saw movement against the white where there had no business being any. At first I took it for an animal, low and dragging through the crust. Then it rose up, and it was a woman. She was Apache. I knew it the way you know weather by the shape of the thing before you can name its parts, the cut of her clothing, the way she held herself upright, even bent nearly double under a bundle almost her own size. She stood perhaps a quarter-mile off, out on the open face of the ridge where the wind had nothing at all to slow it, and she was alone in a way that had a sound to it. I have been alone. I know its particular silence. Hers was louder than mine had ever been. I mean to be truthful about my first feeling, because if I dress it up in Christian charity, I dishonor everything that came after. My first feeling was fear, and my second was something uglier that lived downstream of the fear. In those years there was blood between her people and mine, and I had lost a younger brother to it, and I carried that loss the way you carry a stone worked down into your boot, not always sharp, but never once gone. My hand found the rifle before my mind had given it any leave to. That is the truth, and I set it down plain so you will trust the rest of what I tell you. But she never looked at me. That was the thing that undid my fear. A person who means you harm looks at you. They cannot help it. Harm needs a target the way fire needs air. She did not so much as turn her head. She simply kept moving across that killing wind as though I were one more gray rock in a world made entirely of rock and snow, and there was something in that flat indifference that reached clean past my fear and laid a cold finger on an older question in me. What does a person walk toward, I wondered, when they have stopped caring who watches them fall? I did not ride down to her. I am not proud of that, and I will not hurry past it to get to the part where I look better. I sat my horse behind a stand of wind-bent pine and I watched, telling myself I was being cautious, knowing in the private courtroom of my chest that I was only being afraid. The bundle riding high on her back was too still to be firewood and too carefully shaped to be nothing at all. Twice she stopped and stood with her head bowed, and I understood after a moment that she was not resting. There is a difference, and once you have seen it, you never mistake one for the other again. A resting body slackens, gives its weight to the ground, lets go. Hers only paused, gathered, and drove forward again, and each time she took that first step I found I had been holding my own breath, as if my lungs were somehow bargaining on her behalf with a god I had stopped speaking to. The cold up there is a liar. It tells you, in the gentlest voice it owns, that stopping will feel like mercy. I have found men who believed that lie, sitting peaceful against tree trunks with frost on their eyelashes, looking for all the world as if they had only closed their eyes a moment to think a pleasant thought. She knew the lie for what it was. You could see her refusing it in every step. When a gust knocked her sideways, she did not sit where she landed and call it rest. She got one knee up under herself, then a foot, then the other foot, in that slow and terrible arithmetic of a body that has decided the only acceptable sum is standing. I told myself she was no concern of mine. I told myself a great many sensible things up there in the pines, and the sensible things had the advantage of being partly true, which is what makes them so dangerous. Then the wind shifted a quarter turn and carried me a sound that unmade every sensible thing I owned. It was thin and high, and it came off the bundle on her back, and it was the sound a small child makes when it has cried so long and so hard that it has nearly forgotten how, a sound with no strength left in it, and yet too stubborn to quit. She was carrying a child. She was carrying a child across the roof of the world in a rising storm, and she had not once looked at me, because looking at me would have cost her a step, and she did not have a single step in her to spare on a stranger. The argument with a dead man. I would like to tell you I rode to her at once. I did not. I sat there in the trees and I argued with a dead man. My brother's voice, or the version of it I keep on hand for exactly these occasions, for we make our dead say what we need them to, told me plainly what her people had done and what kind of fool forgets it. And I listened, because grief is the most persuasive lawyer that ever pled a case, and it never once loses. But underneath my brother's voice ran another one, quieter, that did not argue at all. It only asked me to remember the winter my wife died. It asked me to remember how a Mexican drover I had never met before, and never once saw again, hauled my mired wagon out of a flooded wash, and fed and rubbed down my half-drowned horses, and asked me for nothing, not even my name. It asked me to remember how I had spent that entire black season certain there was no kindness left anywhere in all creation, and how that one nameless stranger had been the single thread I kept hold of, while everything else in my life came apart in my hands. A man can hold two things at once. Hatred is one of them, and it has a good grip, and it does not tire. But so is the memory of having been saved by someone who owed you exactly nothing. I sat there in the saddle with both of those in my two hands, and I weighed them against each other, and I will not pretend it was a noble moment, because it was not. It was arithmetic, cold as the ridge itself. She would die if I did nothing. The child would die first, being smaller and having less to burn. And I would ride home and light my stew and eat my supper and write nothing in my book, because some days are too empty even to record. And by the simple act of doing nothing, I would quietly become a man who had watched a woman and a child die, and then gone home to eat. I have been a good many things I am not proud of, but I decided, up there in the pines with my brother's ghost hauling on one arm and a dead stranger's kindness hauling on the other, that I would not be that particular thing. Not that morning. I reined my horse out of the trees and started him down the slope toward her, and my heart was going like a hammer on cold iron. And the plain truth is I still did not know whether I was riding down to help her or only to be near enough to see how it ended. Sometimes courage and curiosity wear the same coat, and you do not learn which one you put on until you are already halfway down the hill. The meeting. She heard me before she saw me. The crunch of iron-shod hooves through frozen crust carries a long way up there. And what she did in that instant told me more about the life she had lived than an hour of talk could have. She did not run. She could not have run. She had nothing left in her legs for running. Instead she turned, and she put her whole body between me and the bundle on her back, and her hand went to her belt and came up with a knife that was more idea than weapon, a small worn thing ground down by years of use, and she held it low and steady, and she looked at me with eyes that had already counted the cost of losing everything and found, at the bottom of the counting, that there was nothing left in the till to take. A person in that condition is at once the most dangerous and the most breakable thing in the whole world. Both. And at the same time. I stopped my horse a good way short of her. I opened both my hands where she could see them, and I kept them open. I do not speak but a few words of Apache, and she, as I would learn, spoke a good deal more of my tongue than she ever let on, having worked a season at a mission she would never afterward name to me. But in that first raw moment neither of us had any words the other could trust, so we used the older language instead, the one that came before speech. I climbed down off the horse slow, one deliberate motion at a time. I took the blanket from behind my saddle. a good heavy wool one, the last thing my wife ever wove on her loom before her hands went still, and I had not let another living soul so much as touch it in 6 years. And I held it out at the full stretch of my arm and laid it down on the snow in the open ground between us, and I stepped back from it. She did not move for a long time. The wind screamed across the ridge. The child made its thin sound again, that small exhausted protest against the whole idea of dying. And I watched her eyes travel from the blanket to my face and back again, over and over, doing the very same cold arithmetic I had done up in the trees, weighing what a gift is likely to cost against what refusing it will surely cost. And I understood in that moment that we were the same kind of creature. She and I, two people who had learned the hard way in separate lives, that the world never hands you a single thing without a hook set somewhere in it, and who had grown so accustomed to the hook that a bare and honest gift now looked to us like the greater danger of the two. Then she knelt, never once taking her eyes off me, and she took up the blanket, and she did not wrap it around her own shoulders. She swung the bundle down off her back with a tenderness that broke something loose behind my ribs, and I saw it was a child, a small girl, perhaps 2 winters old, blue about the lips and the fingers. She wrapped the girl in my dead wife's weaving and pressed the small cold face to the warm hollow of her own throat and covered her over. And only then, only after the child was seen to, did she raise her eyes back to me. And she said one word in English, cracked and rough from cold and from long disuse. Why? The question I could not answer. It was not a plea. It was not thanks. It was a demand put to me flat as a slap. Why would you, of all the men in this hard country, do this thing? And I found I did not have an answer she would believe, for the good reason that I did not have one I believed myself. I thought of my brother in his grave. I thought of the drover I never thanked. I thought of my wife's hands moving sure and quick across the loom, and of her last blanket now wrapped warm around a stranger's child, and I found that my throat had closed up tight, and the only thing I could force through it was the truth, which is generally the very last thing a proud man reaches for, having tried everything else first. Because I watched too long already, I said, and I am done watching. She studied me the way you study a river before you set foot in it, looking hard for the smooth part that will pull you under and drown you. Then something in her face moved. I will not lie to you and call it softening, because it did not soften. It shifted, the way the frozen ground shifts in spring when the frost finally lets go its grip far down beneath the surface, a movement you feel more than see. She rose to her feet. She settled the child firm against her chest, and she looked past me and up the mountain, to the pass that was already filling and closing with snow, and to the long dark unspeakable miles that waited beyond it, and I understood with a cold certainty that she meant to keep going. Blanket or no blanket, help or no help, and that in the whole of this ordeal she had never once, not for a single breath, entertained the notion of stopping. That is the thing I wrote in my book that night by the fire, the 4 words. She would not fall. I had ridden down that slope believing I might save her, and standing there in the wind with my 2 empty hands, I understood at last that she did not need saving. She needed a witness. She needed one single living soul to see that she had not laid herself down in the snow, so that if she did die up on that mountain it would be as a woman who kept walking, and not as a shape, the snow quietly rounded off and covered over as though it had never held a name. And I found, to my own considerable surprise, that I wanted to be that soul more than I had wanted anything at all in 6 long and frozen years. What she was walking away from. It came out in pieces over the hours that followed, the way hard truths always do between the wind and the walking, because I had already decided, without deciding, in the way the truly important choices get made in a man before he has thought to consult himself, that I was not going home that day. She had come up from the south, from a camp that was no longer a camp. Men had come to it. Whether they were soldiers or only men doing the work soldiers do while wearing no coat that could be blamed, I never learned for certain, and I did not press her, for some doors a decent man leaves shut. Her husband was dead. Her mother was dead. The old man who had taught her the mountain paths when she was a girl was dead. She named them for me not as a list of griefs but as a kind of map, a map of who was gone. And when she had finished the nomming she said, in that same cracked English, watching the pass and not me, the one sentence that has stayed lodged in me longer than my own wedding vows. I thought I had no one left, she said, and so I stopped being afraid. When you have no one, there is nothing left to lose, and a person with nothing to lose is not brave, whatever the songs say. She is only empty. I walked because walking was a thing my legs still knew how to do. I did not care in the least where. Then she looked down at the child asleep at her throat, and I watched the emptiness in her face wrestle with something else, something that plainly cost her far more than the cold did. But she is not nothing, she said, and her voice changed on the words. She is my sister's child. My sister is also gone now. So I have one thing left to lose, one, and the having of it has made me afraid all over again, and I hate the fear, and I would not give it back for anything under heaven. She said that last part fiercely, almost angry, as though she were daring the mountain itself to try and take from her the one clean terror that had reached down and made her a living woman again instead of a walking empty place. So I do not walk to walk anymore. I walk to somewhere. There are people of my husband's far to the east. It is a long way. I will put her in their hands. That is all that is left of me now, and it is enough, and it will have to be. I have turned that over in my mind 1,000 nights since, that she counted her love for the child as a wound, that she named her one remaining tie to the living world as the thing that hurt her most, and guarded it the way another woman might guard gold. I have come to believe that is the truest description of love I have ever been given, and that it took a half-frozen Apache woman on a killing ridge to teach it to a man who had buried a wife and never once let himself feel the size of what he had lost. The decision to ride beside her. I had a warm house 11 miles behind me, and a fire laid ready in the stove, and a stew that wanted only a match. I had every reason in the world to point her toward the easiest of the low passes and ride home and be able to tell myself, over that stew, that I had done a decent enough thing by a stranger. That is what a sensible man does. He helps a little within reason, and then he returns to his own life, because the world is fairly brimming with drowning people, and you cannot go leaping in after every one of them or you will surely drown yourself. This is true. I have used it to excuse a great deal of cowardice across the years, and I expect I am not alone in that. But I looked at the pass she had aimed herself toward, and I knew that country the way she knew grief, intimately, and without any illusions left about its nature, and I knew past all doubting that a woman on foot carrying a child would never make the far side of it. Not in this weather. The low passes she did not know, and the storm was already drawing them shut one by one. The high pass she was set on would kill her by the second night as surely as if she had lain down at the foot of it. But I knew another way. A hard way, a way for a horse and a mule and a stubborn fool, through a cut that most men in that country had long since forgotten was even there. It would set her on the eastern slope in 2 days where the pass would have taken 5, if it let her through at all. I knew it because I had run from my own life through that same cut once, years back, and turned around at the top of it because I found, to my shame and my saving, that I could not bring myself to leave my dead where they lay behind me. So I did the thing I had spent 6 years telling myself I was too broken and too old and too emptied out to do. I offered to go with her, not to carry her. She would have put that worn little knife in me and been right to, but to ride beside her, to put the horse between her and the worst of the wind, to show her the cut, to be the one who knew the way when the way ran out from under her. She looked at me a long, long time, weighing whether a man's help could possibly be worth the danger of trusting a man, and I watched her come at last to the same shore I had washed up on back in the pines, that certain risks can only be survived by taking on a larger one. She nodded, just once. She did not thank me, and I was glad of it, deeply glad, because thanks would have turned it into charity, and it was never for one moment charity. It was 2 people who had each been left with no one at all, agreeing without a word spoken aloud to be someone for a little while, across a mountain, in the snow. We started for the cut as the last of the light bled out of the sky. She walked. I led the horse and let her set the pace, and I did not once suggest she climb up and ride, because I had already understood that the walking was the last thing in this world she still owned outright, and a man does not take from a person the single thing they have left to call their own. The child slept against her throat, warm now, breathing slow and even. And I thought, as the dark came down hard over that terrible white country, that I had woken that morning a man who buried people and never wept at the graves, and that somewhere on that ridge, without quite meaning to, I had become something else that I did not yet have a name for, and that I was by no means certain I would survive the finding out of what it was. We had 2 full days of mountain in front of us. I did not yet know what the mountain would demand of us both before it consented to let us pass. If I had known, truly known in my bones and not just my mind, I cannot swear before God that I would have found the nerve to take that first step into the dark beside her. But I did not know, so I took it, and she took hers. And behind us, the snow came down soft and patient, and covered over our tracks as we made them, as though the world itself wished very much to pretend that neither of us had ever passed that way at all. The first night in the cut, I learned her name, and I learned it by accident, which is the only way she would have given it. The child woke in the small dark hours and would not settle, and the woman sang to her, low, barely a breath, a song with no tune I could follow, and in the middle of it she said the girl's name and then her own, the way you do when you are reminding a frightened child who is holding her. Dotest, she was. I will not tell you I said it right the first dozen times or the first 100. She corrected me with a patience that surprised me, given everything, until my clumsy mouth got near enough. The child she called Little Bird in her own tongue because, she told me, and it was the first thing that ever came close to a smile on her, the girl had been born loud and had never once seen a reason to be quiet. I write these small things down because they are what I have. The historians will tell you about the campaigns and the treaties and the men whose names got carved into things. I can only tell you that a woman named Dotest sang half a song to a child called Little Bird in the black cold of a forgotten mountain cut, and that I lay 6 feet off under my own blanket pretending to sleep so as not to intrude on it, and that it was, I think, the most sacred thing I have ever been permitted to overhear. A man does not get many of those. I have learned to hold still when one comes. The cut. By first light I could see what I had brought us into, and I will be honest that it frightened me more by day than the storm had by night. The cut is a wound in the mountain, a narrow throat of rock where some old river gave up its work 1,000 ages back, and left behind a passage barely wide enough in places for the horse to pass with the pack scraping stone on either side. The walls go up so sheer and so high that the sun only visits the floor of it for an hour near noon, and the rest of the day it is a place of blue shadow and old cold that the season never fully leaves. Ice hangs off the rock in beards and columns. The footing is bad and worse, and it is silent, not the peaceful silence of a meadow, but the held-breath silence of a place that does not want you in it. Dotest took to it the way she took to everything, which is to say she read it. I have known scouts and I have known hunters, and I never saw any of them read ground the way that woman did. She would stop and study a stretch of ice-glazed rock that looked to me like every other stretch, and she would find in it the one line a body could cross, and she would go, and I would follow her line and find it good. She never explained how she knew. I do not think she could have. It was the old man's teaching in her, the one who had died, living on in her feet, and I came to think that every step she took right was a small grief and a small victory both, the dead man walking her through the mountain from wherever the dead go. The child rode on her back through the worst of it, wrapped and warm and true to her name, loud when she had an opinion. And I will tell you a thing I did not expect. The sound of that child's complaining, thin and cross and alive, became the finest sound in my world. In that dead blue silence, a fussing child meant a living child, and I found myself listening for it the way a man listens for his own heart, and going cold whenever it stopped too long. The first reckoning. We were most of the first day into the cut when we came to the slide. A whole shoulder of the mountain had let go sometime in the past, maybe that same storm, maybe 100 years gone, and dumped itself across the throat of the passage, a chaos of broken rock and frozen mud and shattered ice, tilted and treacherous, filling the cut wall to wall and rising up higher than a man on a horse. There was no going around it. The walls saw to that. There was only over or back, and back was 5 days of open pass that would kill the child, and we all three knew it standing there looking up at the thing. The horse could not make it. I saw that at once, and it broke my heart a little, because he had carried me faithful for 9 years, and I loved him the plain way you love a good animal. The rock was too loose and the pitch too steep and the gaps too wide. He would break a leg in the first 10 feet, and then I would have to do the thing you do for a horse with a broken leg, up there where the sound of it would carry forever off the walls. Dotest knew it too. She looked at the horse, and she looked at me, and she did not say the cruel, obvious thing, which was that the horse had been my idea and my comfort and was now only weight. She let me come to it myself, which was a kindness I have not forgotten. So I made the decision, and it was the first of the heavy ones the mountain asked of me. I stripped the horse of everything we could carry on our own backs, the food, the good blanket, the little we had, and I turned him loose to find his own way back down the cut and out, and to live or not live as the mountain decided, because I could not make myself do the other thing, not to him, not that day. He did not want to go. He followed us to the foot of the slide and stood there making the low sound a horse makes when it does not understand why you are leaving it. And I did not look back, because a man has only so much he can carry over a mountain, and I had already reached my weight in the leaving of him. Dotest watched me the whole of it, and when it was done, when the horse had finally turned and picked his careful way back into the shadow and was gone, she said the second thing that has stayed in me all these years. "Now you have lost something too," she said, not cruel, not glad, just true, the way she said all true things. "Now we are the same on this mountain." And God help me, she was right, and it helped. I have never been able to explain to anyone why the losing of that horse, small as it was against all she had lost, let me stand beside her as an equal in the losing instead of above her as a helper. But it did. Grief shared is not grief halved, whatever the sampler on the wall says. It is only grief with company, and that turns out to be the thing that matters. Over the slide. We went up the slide with the child between us, passing her hand to hand across the bad places. And I have never been so afraid in my life, not in any fight, not at any deathbed. Rocks shifted under us and slid away down behind and cracked like gunfire off the walls. Twice Dotest went down to a knee and I caught the child, and once I went down full length and slid and she caught my wrist with a grip I would not have believed was in her, and hauled and held until I got a foot under me again. We did not speak. There was no breath for it. There was only the next handhold and the next, and the child's small weight going back and forth between us like the one thing in the world worth saving, which, up there, it was. Near the top I made a mistake. I put my weight on a slab that looked sound and was not, and it went, and I went with it, and for one long white instant I was sliding down the whole terrible face of that slide toward a drop that had no bottom I could see. What stopped me was Dotest's arm. She had thrown the child up onto the flat above and thrown herself down flat and jammed her own body into a gap in the rock and reached, and my sliding brought my hand into hers, and she took the whole weight of me falling on that one thin arm, and she screamed the first sound of pain I ever heard from her, torn out of her against her will, and she did not let go. She should have let go. Any sensible creature lets go before the falling man takes them both. She did not let go. I got a knee, a foot, the flat rock, and then I was up beside her and the child, and the three of us lay there heaving in the thin, cold air, and her arm hung wrong from the shoulder, and she had done it for a man whose people had killed hers. I set the shoulder for her there on the top of the slide, and it is the worst thing I have ever done with my hands and the most necessary. She let me. She bit down on a fold of the good blanket and she let me, and she made almost no sound. And when it was done and the arm was back in its socket, she looked at me with tears standing in her eyes that were not from the pain or not only, and she said, "You would not fall." My own words that I had written in my book about her, given back to me. I have not to this day worked out whether she had heard me say them, or whether she simply arrived at the same 4 words on her own because they were the only true ones for what we were doing up there. I have decided it does not matter. Some things are true in 2 mouths at once. The hawk in the small fire. I have skipped a thing, and it belongs here, because it was the hour I stopped being afraid of her and started being afraid for her, which is a different country entirely. It was the morning of the 2nd day, before the fork, while we were still coming down through the timber on the east slope. She had gone ahead a little to read the ground, one-armed, the child on my back, and she stopped stone still with her good hand up, and I stopped, and for a long moment there was nothing, and then I saw what she saw. A hawk low over the timber, hunting. Only a hawk, but she watched it with a stillness that had nothing idle in it, and when it had wheeled off she let out a breath and said that where there were hawks hunting low and easy, there were no men moving, for the birds go still and high when men are about. And so the hawk had just told her we were alone in that stretch of country, and safe, for an hour. I mention it because it was the moment I understood the full size of the vigilance she had been carrying the entire way, on top of the grief and the cold, and the ruined arm and the child. She had been reading the birds. She had been reading the birds while I was congratulating myself on knowing a cut through a mountain. Every easy step I took, she had already paid for with a watchfulness I could not have sustained for an hour, and she had done it so quietly that I had mistaken her exhaustion for calm. I have never since met a strength like it, and I have looked. Most of what men call strength is noise. Hers made no noise at all. It only kept the child alive, hour after hour, by seeing everything and saying almost nothing. We stopped at midday by a trickle of meltwater, and I risked a small fire, the first warmth in 2 days, feeding it careful so the smoke stayed thin. And we thawed the last of the food, and little bird sat in the dirt by the flames and stacked pebbles and knocked them down and laughed her loud laugh. And for the length of that small fire, the mountain let us be only 3 tired people resting, and not a chase, and not a grief. Dodest watched the child play, and she did not watch the timber for once. She let me watch it, she trusted me to watch it, and she closed her eyes for a few minutes in the thin sun. It was the only time I saw her rest on that whole crossing. I kept the watch. I would have kept it a year. No hawk went up. We were alone. She slept 8 minutes by the sun and woke without a sound, and we went on, and I have counted those 8 minutes ever since among the few genuinely useful things I have done with my life. The long night in the rocks. That night we could not go on her arm, the dark, the cold that came down like a lid, and there was no wood in that stone throat to burn. So we did the only thing left, which was to put the child between us and put the good blanket over the 3 of us, and give her our warmth from both sides and lie still and endure the night with our bodies. It is a strange intimacy that, with a stranger who is also now the person you trust most in the world, and I have never known its like before or since. We did not sleep. You do not sleep in that cold. Sleep is the door the cold wants you to walk through. So we talked low over the head of the child to keep each other on the near side of that door. She told me about her husband, who had been a quiet man and a fine one, and who had made her laugh in a way she had thought was gone out of her for good until the child, until little bird, brought a smaller version of it back. She told me about her sister, the child's mother, and how the 2 of them had been fierce rivals as girls and fiercer friends as women, and how she had promised her sister, in the last bad hour, that she would carry the child east or die on the way, and how she meant to keep the second half of the promise as faithfully as the first if it came to that. And she told me, at the very bottom of the night in the smallest voice she owned, that she was afraid she would not be enough, that she did not know how to be a mother, that she was carrying this child toward strangers because she did not trust her own broken self to raise her, and that this was the deepest shame she had, deeper than any grief, and she had told it to no one, and she was telling it to me only because we would likely die on this mountain, and a secret told to a dying man is safe. I told her she was already enough, and that a woman who would hang a man's whole weight off a dislocating arm rather than let him fall did not need instruction in love from anyone alive. I do not know if she believed me. I am not certain I said it well. I am a rancher, and my tongue was never my best tool. But I said it, and she went quiet, and after a while I felt her breathing slow toward the near edge of sleep, the safe edge, and I stayed awake the rest of that night on purpose, watching the black square of sky at the top of the cut go from black to gray, keeping the two of them on the living side of the cold, because it was the one useful thing a clumsy man could do, and I wanted so badly to be useful to her that it frightened me. What the morning showed us. Morning showed us the far mouth of the cut, and it showed us how far we still had to go, and it showed us something else that took the breath clean out of me. Her arm, the one that had held me, had swelled in the night to twice its size and gone the colors of a bad sky, and she could not use the hand at all, and she had said nothing about it, and she would have said nothing about it, and she picked up the child one-armed and stood and looked at me as if to ask what I was waiting for. I have known brave men. I have buried a few of them. I never knew a bravery like that, the kind that does not announce itself or ask for anything, that simply absorbs the damage and keeps walking because the child does not weigh any less for the arm being ruined. I carried the child that day. She let me, which I understood was the largest trust she had left to give, and I did not take it lightly, and I did not let the girl out of my two arms for one step of it. And a strange thing happened as I carried her. Little Bird, who had feared me and cried at my nearness for a day and a night, put her small cold hand flat against my jaw as we walked, the way a child does when it is deciding about you, and she left it there a long time, and then she laughed at nothing, at the beard on my face, at the sway of the walking, at being alive on a mountain that had tried its best to kill her. And I felt something in my chest that had been frozen solid for 6 years crack straight down the middle and let out water. Dotest watched that happen. She watched the child decide about me, and she watched what it did to my face, and she did not smile, but she made a small sound in her throat, and she said, "She does not laugh for everyone." And I understood that I had been given something up there that I had not earned and could not repay, and that the woman beside me had given it to me on purpose, one-armed and wrecked and grieving, because she had seen that I needed it as badly as her child needed carrying. That is who she was. Half dead on a mountain, and still watching close enough to see what a broken stranger needed, and still generous enough to hand it over. The weight of the second choice. We came out of the cut by the middle of that second day onto the eastern slope, and it was gentler country, timbered and dropping away toward the plains, and for the first time I let myself believe we might live. And that is exactly when the mountain asked its second heavy thing of me, though it was not the mountain asking, it was her. There was a fork in the way down. One branch, the long one, ran on east the way she was going, toward her husband's people, days of it still, hard days with her arm the way it was. The other branch, the short one, ran south and down, 3 hours at the most to my own ranch, to my warm house and my stove and my life. She stopped at the fork and she looked down the short branch, and she knew what lay at the end of it because I had told her in the night about the house and the stew and the fire, the small stupid comforts of a lonely man. And she said, "Go home now. You have done more than any man of your people has ever done for one of mine. Go home. We will make it from here." And the terrible thing, the thing I have to confess, is that they would not have made it from there, and we both knew it, and she was telling me to go home anyway. Her arm was ruined. The child could not walk the distance. It was days yet to her husband's people, and she had one working arm to carry a child and fend off whatever the country held. She was offering to release me from the whole thing, to let me keep the version of myself that had done a decent deed and gone home to be warm, and she was doing it knowing it would likely cost her and the child their lives, because she had decided that I had given enough, and that my life was mine to keep, and that she would not take 1 hour more of it than I offered freely. It was the most generous cruelty I have ever been handed, and I stood at that fork, and I understood that whatever I chose in the next breath would be the truest thing anyone would ever know about me. The fork. I did not go home. I want to tell you I chose it nobly, that I stood there and weighed my duty and rose to it like a man in a sermon. That is not how it went. What went through me at that fork was not nobility. It was a plain and quiet horror at the idea of the short branch. At the house at the end of it, the stove, the stew, the 6 years of silence I had called a life, all of it waiting to close back over my head like the snow closing over our tracks, and me sitting in the middle of it for the rest of my days knowing that I had been given the chance to be someone, and had chosen instead to go home and be warm and alone. The short branch did not look like comfort to me anymore. It looked like a grave with a good stove in it. So I did not weigh it. I just shouldered the child a little higher and turned my feet up the long branch, the eastern one, her one, and I said the only thing there was to say, which was, I have no one at that house. You have somewhere to be. I will see you there. And Dates looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had not seen on her before and have never forgot, because it was not gratitude, which she would have hated to feel, and it was not surprise, because I think she had known me by then better than I knew myself. It was recognition. The look one traveler gives another on a road they had each believed they walked alone. She turned up the long branch beside me. She did not thank me. I did not want her to. We walked. Behind us, the short branch fell away south toward my old life, and I did not look back at it any more than I had looked back at the horse, because I had finally learned the one thing the mountain had been trying to teach me since the first sight of her on the ridge, that a man does not carry his life on his back the way she carried that child. A man carries only what he chooses to, and puts down the rest, and finds out who he is by what he refuses to set down. I had set down a great deal on that mountain. I found I was lighter for all of it, and steadier, and less afraid, walking up the hard way with a ruined woman and a laughing child toward strangers who might not want us, than I had been in 6 years of being warm and safe, and no one's anything at all. We had days yet to go, and her arm, and the country, and whatever waited at the end for a white man walking in with an Apache woman and a child that was not his. I did not know how any of it would fall, but I had stopped needing to know. That, too, she had taught me, without ever once meaning to teach me. The mountain was behind us, but the road was not done, and the plain that opened out at the foot of the eastern slope was its own kind of trial, gentler on the legs and harder on the spirit. On the mountain there had been the next handhold and the next, and a body knows what to do with that. On the plain there was only distance, flat and patient and endless, and time to think, which is the more dangerous country of the two. Dates' arm mended wrong and slow. The child ran out of the last of her mother's milk fat and grew thin. And I, who had been useful on the rock, found myself with little to do but walk and carry and worry is a poor companion on a long flat road. We walked 4 days across that country. I will not pretend they were dramatic. They were mostly hunger and blisters and the low, grinding fear of being seen by the wrong men, which was a fear that belonged more to her and the child than to me, and which shamed me for how lightly I had carried it my whole life. A white man walks where he likes. I had never once thought about it. Walking beside her, I thought about it every hour, watching her read the horizon, watching her put the child and herself in the low ground and the brush without a word whenever the land opened too wide, and I understood that I had spent my life in a house whose walls I had never seen because I had never been made to stand outside them. That is a hard thing to learn at my age. She taught it to me without one word of blame, only by the plain fact of how differently the same country treated the two of us. Somewhere on the plain we stopped being strangers, and I could not tell you the hour it happened, because it happened the way real things do, underneath the noticing. We talked less than you would think. Long stretches went by with nothing but the child's chatter and the sound of our feet. But it was the good silence by then, the kind married people have, that does not need filling. When we did talk it was small. She taught me words in her tongue and laughed kindly at my mouth's failures. I told her about cattle, and she found the whole business of a man owning and chasing animals that could not feed themselves quietly hilarious, And she was right, and I laughed too at my own life, for the first time in years. We did not talk about what came after. That was the one silence that was not comfortable, because we both knew that the road had an end, and that the end was her husband's people, and that when we reached them my part was done. I would hand back the child I had carried. I would say whatever there was to say to a woman I had crossed a mountain beside. And then I would turn around and walk back across the whole of it alone, to the house with the good stove that I had come to think of as a grave, and that would be the end of the only stretch of my life since my wife died that had felt like living. Neither of us said any of this. But it walked with us, the third silent traveler, and it grew heavier the closer we got. And some nights I caught her looking at me across the small fire with something in her face that I did not let myself name, because naming it would have made the ending worse, and the ending was coming whether I named it or not. Not this one, I will give you anything, not this one. I did not know who she was bargaining with. The fever, the country, her God, or mine, or the dead. It did not matter. I have never heard a prayer like it before or since, because it was not asking for herself, it was offering herself, the last of herself, in trade. And there was nothing left of her to offer, and she offered it anyway. And I knelt down beside her in the dirt, and I put my arms around the both of them, the woman and the burning child, which I had never presumed to do, and she let me. She leaned the whole weight of her breaking into me, and we held the child between us the way we had held her going over the slide. The one thing worth saving passed back and forth between two people who had nothing else, and we waited out the night like that. And I prayed too, badly, to a God I had not spoken to in 6 years. And I did not care that I was bad at it. The turn. The fever broke near dawn. I have no explanation for it, and I have stopped looking for one. The plants, the cool water, the long night of two people's warmth, the prayers of a rancher and an Apache woman thrown up at whatever was listening. Something in that broke the fever, or nothing did, and the child's own small stubborn body did it alone, born loud and refusing to be quiet even before death. She woke thin and weak and cross, and she asked for water in her few words, cross about the water, cross about everything, gloriously and loudly cross. And Dottis laughed and wept at the same time in a way I did not know a face could do, and pressed the child to her, and looked at me over the small head with her eyes streaming, and neither of us said a word because there were none the size of it. That morning, while the child slept a healing sleep and the sun came up clean over the flat country, Dottis said the thing to me that I have carried longest of all. She said, "On the ridge, when you found me, I told you I had no one left. I was wrong, and I did not know I was wrong until this night. I had her." She looked down at the child. "And now I have you also, whatever comes at the end of this road. A person is not no one who has been carried the way you carried us. You made me a liar. I thank you for it." And she did thank me at last, after all those miles of refusing to, and I understood that she had saved it, the thanks, for the one thing that was worth it, and that I would never in my life be thanked like that again, and I have not been. The people at the end of the road. We came to her husband's people on the 9th day, in a camp along a river in a fold of low hills, and I will tell you the truth of that arrival, which is not the truth I would have written if I were making it up. They did not welcome me. Why would they? A white man walking in out of the West with one of their own women and a sick child, and a story that sounded like a lie or a trap. There was a long bad hour where I stood apart with hard eyes on me and hands near weapons, and Dottis spoke for me, fast and low, telling them what I had done, and I could not follow the words, but I could follow her arm pointing back west at the mountain we had crossed, and the faces did not soften easy, and I do not blame them, for their fathers had faces on the other side of my people that had not softened either. It was an old woman who ended it. The dead husband's mother, I gathered, the child's grandmother by that reckoning, who came out slow from a lodge and looked a long time at the child and a long time at Dottis, and then a long time at me, and who said something that made the hands come away from the weapons, and who walked up to me, small, bent, older than the hills behind her, and put her two dry hands on my face the exact way the child had done on the mountain, deciding about me, and looked into my eyes for what felt like a year. And then said one word in careful English that she must have carried a long time waiting for a use. Brother, just that. And she turned and took the child from Datest's arms with the sureness of a woman who had raised many, and the camp let out its breath, and I was, for that hour, inside the walls instead of outside them, and I understood at last from the inside what it had cost her every day of her life to stand outside mine. The old woman's second gift. There is one more thing from the camp I have not told, and it is the strangest, and I have never known what to make of it. On my last night there, the old woman, the grandmother, the one who had called me brother, came to the fire where I sat and lowered herself down beside me, slow, all her bones complaining, and she looked into the fire a long while, and then she began to talk, and one of the younger ones who had the English translated for me low, because the old woman wanted me to have this and knew I would not otherwise. She told me she had lost sons, more than one, to my people, to sickness, to the long, slow grinding that had brought her band down from what it was to this camp along the river. And she said she had spent many years hatting, and that the hatting had been just, and that she did not take it back or apologize for it, because a mother is owed her hate the way she is owed her grief, and no one may tell her to set either down. But she said that, when she had put her hands on my face and looked in my eyes, she had seen in there a man who had also lost, and been emptied, and been filled back up by carrying, and she said that it had done a thing to her hate that 30 years of peace talk from men in offices had never done. It had not ended the hate, but it had put beside the hate one single man she could not hate, and she said that this was more than she had thought possible in her life, and that it was my gift to her, though I had not meant to give it, and that she wanted me to know it before I left so that I would carry east and west between our peoples the one true fact she had learned in her long life. Which was this, and she made the young one say it twice so I would have it exact, that hate is a thing between peoples and love is a thing between persons, and that the second is smaller and slower, but it is the only one that has ever, even once in all the history of the world, actually saved anybody. I have never heard it put better. I never will. I have tried to live inside it. I have mostly failed. But I have never stopped trying, and the trying is the old woman's gift living on in me, the way the mountain lives on in the child who stops for the fallen. The leaving. I stayed 3 days. They fed me and let me rest, and the child grew stronger by the hour, loud again, blessedly loud, running unsteady around the camp and falling and getting up in her small arithmetic of a body that had decided the sum must come out to standing. Her aunt's lesson already in her, though she was too young to know she was learning it. And on the 3rd day I knew it was time to go, because a man knows when he has come to the end of his usefulness, and I had come to the end of mine. The child was safe. The people were her people. Datest was home, or as near to home as the world had left her, among those who had loved her husband and would help her raise his sister's child, and my part in it was finished, and to stay past the finish of your part is to become a weight, and I would not be a weight to her after everything. She walked me out of the camp at first light, alone, the two of us, the way we had walked so many mornings. At the edge of the camp we stopped. There was a great deal to say and no way to say it, and we both knew it. And so we did the thing we had learned to do on the mountain, which was to use the older language, the one before words. She reached up with her good arm and she put her hand flat against my face, the way the child had, the way the old woman had, deciding about me one last time, or maybe not deciding, maybe just holding. And she looked at me a long time, and I put my own hand up over hers and held it against my face. And we stood there like that in the cold, clean morning at the edge of the world with everything unsaid and nothing needing to be said. Then she took her hand back gently and she said, "Go home now, you have a house." And I said, "It is not much of a home." And she said, and this is the last thing she ever said to me, and I have kept it like the 4 words in my book, kept it closer than anything I own, she said, "It is more of one now than it was. You carried us. A man who has carried someone is never again no one and never again all the way empty. You will find you are heavier in the good way all the rest of your life. That is what I have to give you. It is all I have, take it and go. And I took it and I went. The long walk back. I will not tell you much about the walk back over the mountain, because there is not much to tell that matters, and because a man's solitary grief is a poor thing to spend a reader's patience on. I found the horse, is one thing worth saying. He had lived. He had made it down out of the cut and been taken up by a family of homesteaders who gave him back to me without a fuss when I described his markings and the scar on his near foreleg. And riding him again over that country was the one mercy of the return. I went back through the cut. I stood at the top of the slide where she had held my whole weight off her breaking arm, and I said her name out loud to the stone walls. Once, the way she had taught me to say it, near enough right, and the walls gave it back to me, and I let them, and then I rode on down and out and home. The house was as I had left it. The stove, the stew pot, the 6 years of silence waiting to close back over my head. And here is the thing I climbed a mountain to learn and have spent the rest of my life proving true. It did not close back over me. She was right. I was heavier now in the good way. I could not go back to being no one because I had carried someone, and you cannot uncarry a person. They stay in the arms and the back and the chest long after you have set them down. I lit the stove. I ate the stew. And it was a different house than it had been, because a different man was sitting in it, and the difference was her, and the child, and the mountain, and I would not have traded the ache of the difference for all the numb comfort I had called peace before. What I have left. I never saw her again. I want to be honest about that, because the stories always end with the reunion and the road that brings them back around to each other, and life mostly does not, and mine did not. There was a war on and then another kind of slower war, and the country between us filled up with fences and fear, and a white rancher does not simply ride into an Apache camp in those years, not even one who was called brother once by an old woman with her hands on his face. I wrote it in my book instead. I wrote all of it over many nights, the whole crossing, so that it would exist somewhere outside my own failing head, and I have read it back to myself in the bad seasons, the way another man reads Scripture, and it has held me up the way Scripture is supposed to and mostly doesn't. I heard, years on, third-hand and unreliable, the way news traveled in that country, that a woman of that band with a ruined arm had raised a girl who grew up loud and unafraid and hard to govern, and who was known for the strange, fierce fact that she would not, under any circumstance, walk past a person who had fallen down. I do not know if it was them. I have decided to believe it was, because a man is allowed a few decided things at the end, a few beliefs he holds not because they are proven but because he needs them, and I need that one. I need to believe the child I carried grew up to be a woman who stops for the fallen. It would mean the whole crossing planted something that outlived all of us, and that is the most a person can ask of any hard thing they did once in the snow, when it would have been so much easier to ride away. So that is the story. She thought she had no one left, and she was wrong, and she did not learn she was wrong until a fever broke over a child in the dark on a flat plain, and I thought I was a hollow man who buried people and never wept, and I was wrong too, and I did not learn it until a woman I should have feared hung my whole weight off her breaking arm and would not let me fall. We save each other by the strangest means, and almost never the ones we planned. She was walking to walk when I found her. She was walking to somewhere when she left me. And I had not been walking anywhere at all for 6 years, and she got me moving again, an Apache woman on a killing ridge who never asked for a thing, and I have been walking ever since, heavier in the good way and less afraid, and no longer, not for one single day since, all the way empty. I am old now, and I write this in the same leather book on the last pages of it, and my hand is not steady the way it was. There is a girl in the next valley, orphaned this winter, with hard eyes and no one, and tomorrow I mean to ride over and see about her. I do not know yet what I will say, but I know I will not ride away. I learned that once, high up in the snow, from the bravest person I have ever known, and some lessons you only have to be taught the one time.